I call this curriculum meeting to order at 6:02. Roll call, Melissa Bacon.
Here.
Anastasia Ferguson, I'm here. Wes Finney. Adam Tangway is not here, excused, but Jen was coming. Angela Tardif is replaced by Suzanne Bauer.
Here.
Judith Vassal. Vivian Walker. Walker Vivian. Sorry. We have quorum with 5 board members. Any adjustments to the agenda? Hearing none. Approval of the minutes from March 11th, 2025. Any questions, concerns? Seeing none, all in favor? Minutes approved. There is no old business, new business, MHS grading scale.
Right, so as we spoke about earlier in the year in committee, there was a proposal on the table to explore the adjusting the MHS grading scale. And so we learned a little bit about the plans for that, which included some conversations with stakeholders. And we discussed that we would return back to the committee with updates. I think the work, there's still plenty of work to be done, but I have asked Mr. Thurlow and Ms. Ellis to report to us on their progress thus far and hopefully gain some sense of what your additional questions might be as the work continues throughout the spring. So Ty, would you like to kick that off? Oh. I think Shane will be able to help us. Let's see. Sure. So if we're ready, Mr. Thurlow can share with us an update.
Thank you, Judith. So when I visited the committee last, there was a bit of an opportunity for the committee to weigh in on where any potential grading system proposal may go next. And so we appreciate the support that you provided for us to venture out and look at some different systems and some different opportunities. So what we have done in the interim, it's been about 2.5 months since we last met. We have met with various stakeholder groups. So first and foremost, it was to look at some veteran administrators in the district who had undergone that last transition in around the 2015, 2016, and moving forward to what is currently there, which is a 1 through 4 system based on proficiency-based education. Really talk a little bit about some of the processes that occurred, because we want to make sure that we are not reinventing the wheel if we do have a change, but we also want to make sure we avoid some of the pitfalls that existed. And I'm not trying to knock anyone in the DOE, but avoid some of the pitfalls that came from some mandates from the Department of Education. Oftentimes when those laws mandate or indicate that we must change something, it's in a very short timetable and there's not a lot of support or guidance that goes along with that. So we had a great conversation, Mrs. Troiano, with her insight from some various districts, and Mrs. Poulin, having been part of that changeover at the high school at the time, were 2 of many who were really instrumental in that conversation. We then ventured forward to our leadership team at the high school, which is represented from all content areas as well as administration, to talk a little bit about some of the current challenges with our grading system and where we might like to move. And so where we've arrived at, this is sort of where the work currently is we would like to move toward, in a much faster way, a 0 to 100 percentage-based system. This particular system would allow us to update some of our accountability protocols some of which are in very good working order at the high school, and some of which don't actually exist right now. Some of those things that we need to separate ourselves from when we transition from what would be a traditional system of education to proficiency-based education. I think it's important to just talk about that for just one moment. That comparison is that in a proficiency-based education, learning is rolling, like rolling admissions at a university or a college. Learning is happening all of the time. Therefore, we want to be able to grade all of the time. And so that really made things like deadlines and accountability measures challenging. Not impossible, but really challenging. Because if we think that we're going to start out at a very low level of learning and eventually get to a high level of learning, we want to be able to make sure that that opportunity, that door is open the entire time. Sometimes, as we know in life, those doors close and they have a very strict timeline of when they close. So we're hoping that a 0 to 100 percentage-based grading system will allow us to shift some of our practices in terms of accountability measures, and hopefully put us on a better trajectory to prepare our students for what is beyond the walls of Massabesic High School and RSU 57. So part of that next step in the process is actually to get students like Walker and some of his other classmates together for a conversation around their current experience in the grading system, and then what they might perceive as something to be the experience they may have in a 0 to 100, and actually throw some of these accountability measures against the wall and see if they stick with the student group. The goal is also from those same students is to be able to meet with their parents as well. That might be a meeting where all students and parents are together, or we might just meet with students during the day and try to grab the parents at night, but have them at the table for some really important feedback as well. We want to make sure that any grading system change is not only done thoughtfully, but is done in a way that is marketed and publicized in a way that our community is going to be able to really lean into that and support us in that particular endeavor versus asking more questions. So we want to over communicate this to the hilt, starting today all the way through what would be really November and December of next year. I'll talk a little bit about why that over communication is so important. If you take yourselves back 10 years ago in education, when this large change of traditional to PBE was happening, districts who made the transition successfully over communicated to the point where people didn't want to hear about it anymore. Just teach my kid, make sure that they get the learning that they need, and leave us alone because we've over communicated. Districts that really struggled with that transition, I think, waited for other districts to over communicate and see what might happen. And so we were a district that did over communicate. Mrs. Poulin was a driving force in that communication at the time. So we want to definitely take that same step forward, because any change, even if it is to something that feels traditional or feels like something that many of us in this room, no offense, Walker, but many of us in this room were educated in a 0 to 100% grading system. It's something that we just inherently know and feel comfortable with because it was our own experience. So we want to make sure that we're over communicating and answering any questions and really leaving no room for doubt, so to speak. There are going to be some necessary shifts in terms of actual practice, so not policy, because that's at the district level, but in practice. So the idea of bringing back quarter grades, so first quarter, second quarter becomes your semester, third quarter and fourth quarter become your second semester, making sure that those check-ins are happening and reporting out at that particular time. Excuse me. It also does allow us to look at our program of studies in terms of curriculum work, and Mrs. Ellis is the one for all the questions you have about what I'm about to say should be directed to her and not to me. But some of the curriculum work that we have to do, we have a really strong program of studies, one of the strongest I've seen in my career. And so that's a really great wealth of information, a very solid foundation upon which we work. But we may need to make some adjustments as to what a threshold of expectations are in each of the areas of curricula, to ensure that even though we are still teaching and learning the same things and teaching and learning in many of the same ways, the way in which we report out means that we're really raising the bar a little bit, because we're giving teachers potentially more opportunities to be more articulate in reporting out what their students are learning, or in some cases maybe not learning, what they're achieving versus what they're not achieving. Right now, their tools are more limited. when you think about a 1 to 4 system. And so in that, if there are more tools to use, we need to be more clear in our program of studies about the threshold of expectations. Again, all questions about that threshold of expectations comment will be to Allison. She's ready. She's ready for this. And then a final thing that we really need to wrestle with, and it's something that our leadership team is thinking very seriously about. When you adjust to a new grading system, no matter how much you communicate, no matter how much education is happening, we could get group after group after group together to try and get feedback. There is usually an implementation spike or an implementation dip. So when you're implementing a new policy of behavior at a high school, you're going to see an implementation spike. You're going to have more students falling on the negative side of that particular policy because it's a new one and it's a new application. So you're going to see sometimes behavior spike a little bit. Same thing with a new grading system or a new system of learning. We may see an implementation dip, and I'm actually very much predicting an implementation dip. What that means is in the first progress report, which is roughly 6 or 7 weeks into the school year, I predict there will be more current failures in that first 6 weeks than we would see in our last 3 years at that same 6-week mark. Because students will be coming up against a new way to report out on their learning. Not a new way of learning, not a new way of scaffolding to that learning, but a new way of reporting out and accountability measures. Again, some of which I've spoken about that we need to implement, some that we need to shore up more. That will, in my opinion, balance itself out as students and families are understanding the gravity of things like timelines and deadlines and personal accountability, and responding to communication from your teachers and from your administrators. All of these things that we're expected to do in our careers, no matter what field you work in. So I do predict there'll be an implementation dip, but the silver lining, if you will, is that's in the first 6 weeks of a semester, and we still have a second 6 weeks and a third 6 weeks to go to make sure that students are not only making the grades, so to speak, but also understanding how they need to operate in a system that expects more of them because we know they can produce more. So that's where we sit currently with the proposal. There are, I'm sure, lots of questions to be answered along the way, but I think Dr. Doyle wanted us to come here tonight to be able to answer some preliminary questions.
Thank you. I would also add, I think Ty touched on this, but it's a point of emphasis that I really want to make, and that is that the process of this conversion is going to result in education at every single level. So there's the grade reporting pieces, and there are the philosophical underpinnings of what we're trying to achieve in terms of accountability and accuracy in the reporting. We've talked about the need to take a very, very intensive and proactive approach that would involve making sure that everybody's on the same page with those expectations, communicating clearly, perhaps over communicating, as Ty had mentioned, as well as frequent check-ins and monitoring of student progress as they move on. We're not going to wait till the end of Q1 to decide that there are serious issues, right? Our goal is going to understand and anticipate the challenges that students will face and work closely with them to monitor their progress as they come on to this new system. It's really important to us throughout the process, whether it's conversion in general for the students that are currently enrolled or folks getting used to this system, which is different. It's really important to us that we are not doing harm to students throughout that process. And so we're being incredibly intentional about that. I appreciate the work and the conversations that's gone into this. I think, the steps that we've taken to date are thoughtful in nature. They're looking at a big picture approach, and those next steps will include student and parent voices, which I think is a critical aspect of this. For students who are currently enrolled, there will be changes, and they'll need to know and feel comfortable with the supports that are going to be available to them throughout the process. So to Mr. Thurlow's point, I think we can anticipate that, but we can also plan for it. And so that's really what we're going to be doing, is taking a close look as the change is made throughout the fall. Questions?
Okay. Actually, I have 2 questions. One, are you going to make sure as you go to the 0 to 100 that it also, I don't know if it translates well when kids are applying to college to be like, okay, this person's, got a 4.0. I mean, are you going to kind of show that even on the report card? I'm trying to visualize how you guys will
So
communicate that well.
So our transcripts right now, they communicate based on the course level and then
Mhm.
also the overall GPA for 4 years of education. A change to a 0 to 100 system will actually make us far more consistent with York and Cumberland County high schools. We'll be now in the 96th or 97th percentile. Whereas right now we sort of land in the bottom 5%, or not bottom 5, but we're only making up 5% of high schools in York and Cumberland County that report out in a way that is not 0 to 100. So we'll be far more consistent with that, which makes us not only consistent, but I think for some of our students more competitive for area
Okay.
schools. And as far as how the overall report out goes, there isn't a place on the transcript that would indicate that there was one system of education for a student versus another system, because the system itself of their teaching and learning has not changed. But how we report on that right now actually does have a current translation system that you may get a 3.95 for a GPA, but there is a translation conversion chart to 0 100
Okay.
for any of those universities or colleges that are looking to do that translation themselves. We don't want to leave that to chance. So that currently does exist on the transcripts.
Okay.
We wouldn't need that on a future transcript because it will strictly just be 0 to 100.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my other just suggestion is, some of you know my son went to Massabesic for 9th grade. And then we had a complete miscommunication with the administration on how he was doing. I thought he was doing his usual B, C, and then the teachers were like, no, he's failing. And I'm like, what is happening? Granted, it was, the school year of 2020 to 2021. We all know what that was about. So, but because of that negative experience, I homeschooled him sophomore year. I know that's partly what fed into that decision. So the smoother we can make, the better to communicate, the better experience, especially that first semester. So the parents, any parents aren't caught off guard and like, what's happening? It just gets you really upset. So I just wanted to share that as a personal experience that's what happened to us. And granted, between moving, I don't adjust well. I probably was dropping the ball. I'll say it's partly my fault too. Moving's hard mentally. So I just thought, I just say that that was a personal experience. So yeah. So I know many of you weren't here when that happened. So yeah. So that's fun. Just wanted to share that. So yeah.
I just wanted to add to his point, we send a school profile to all of our colleges where our students send their applications out to. So currently what we do is we have to show a conversion of what the 1 through 4 score would look like in a 0 through 100. So many of your colleges actually do the conversion. It's usually in the department that they do a conversion that meets all of the same scale to be able to measure the students equally when looking at applications. So we would be using the school profile again to show the changeover to what we are doing and our historical data, but then they'd be able to see how we mapped out the grades, and it'd be very transparent.
Just a point that's not necessarily specific to transcript as we think of students exiting the system, but thinking about our transfers in, this is another win for us because we currently do a conversion for other schools. As Mr. Thurlow mentioned, we are in the minority in York and Cumberland counties in terms of the way that we report, but it's not uncommon that we have transfers into the system and have to make that shift. So that's been a part of the considerations as well, looking around us and seeing our students at SRTC live in 2 different systems, right? It doesn't mean that we will necessarily align for alignment's sake, but it certainly helps to know that those values will crosswalk much easier in a way that leaves less up to just the variety presented by both of those systems. So we are thoughtful about that in the transition as well, not just at the transcript level, but more accuracy in reporting and conversion all around.
Yes, my question is, it seems like every few years we change the grading scale system. How long will this grading scale system last before we're changing to something new?
So prior to 2015 and 2016, although I wasn't here and was in a different part of the state, we've had a 0 to 100 grading scale at the high school for at least 2 decades prior to that. So I would assume that as the proficiency-based education legislation was curtailed and adjusted in 2018 to allow schools to adjust to however they would like to do things. I don't see that law or that experiment coming back in my career, because if it does, I'll be at the State House testifying against such a shift and an adjustment. So, as far as to give you a number, Judith, I think it would be very challenging, but we enjoyed a very consistent grading scale for several decades prior to this last 10 years. And I just think that that's going to be the going rate for the next several decades.
And my next question is, when I went to school many moons ago,
Only a couple of years, right?
no,
Oh.
I'm 72 now, so it's many moons ago. We had the 0 to 100 scale.
Mhm.
How is this time different?
Yeah.
So I think to give the DOE some credit, the proficiency-based system with curriculum allowed us to do a lot of work for feedback at the formative, interim, and then summative level. And those habits we are going to continue in our curriculum because there's opportunity for growth for our students, but also to receive feedback from students from their teachers in order to improve before they hit the big summative or the test or the final project, what have you. So those components weren't part of the everyday practice in traditional grading scale before 2015. And so that's really where our difference is going to lie, is with our work in curriculum, rubrics, and our practices for feedback for our students.
And my third question doesn't really have anything to do with the grading scale, but do high school students still take SATs?
They do if they choose to. There
Yes.
has been a shift at the post-secondary level where SAT scores, or ACT, which is really more of a Western Coast test, some schools and universities went away a few years ago from those being requirements. There's a little bit of a shift where they're asking for them. It's a preference that they would have those scores, but it's not a requirement. There are some schools that never went away from it, so it is a requirement, but it is a choice. Same thing at the sophomore level. We do offer the PSAT to sophomores as a preparation, and then the SAT for juniors. And as a senior, you can definitely take the SAT more times if you would like to try and get your score a little bit higher. But our guidance counselors are doing a really great job of navigating those challenges or those needs for our students. Once students have a list of schools or universities, colleges that are identified, they will be able to very quickly determine whether a student should take the SAT or perhaps if it's not needed. I think that the overall encouragement, though, is for students that are going to post-secondary institutions is to try it out and take it, because even if you have it in your back pocket and you never go to a school that needs it at the time, you may eventually want that particular data point. So it is offered, and we do that here on site, which is also nice. We even have students from other schools come in and utilize our
I
testing
can
site.
remember taking PSATs and SATs,
Yep.
and they were awful.
Yeah, they're not a lot of fun, but they are a good test of overall potential and aptitude.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
This grading system, is this going to start this coming fall, or is it 26, 27?
So one component I actually left out.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. So one component that I did forget to mention, so thank you for asking that question. We have also, Allison and I specifically have been working with Shane and the rest of the tech team on determining the feasibility of making a switch like this in Synergy. As you can imagine, 10 years ago, not all of our grading systems were in a student information system like Synergy. It was sort of a hybrid. You had teachers with the old Jostyn notebooks, and then you had maybe Power School or Infinite Campus. But now everything is specifically in Synergy. So we do have some assurances that this work can be done in the next several months to get us ready for opening day of 25-26. That has always been our goal from day one, to be able to do that. I think I said that in our first meeting, but not really having a lot of those concrete answers. But again, Shane and Kevin and a few others are speaking with Synergy on the back end work that will need to be done. There is some programming that will have to be done on their end to make this shift, especially when we talk about making sure that all grades are shifted correctly, are adjusted correctly, and make sure that translation is correct. We have a system that we have proposed as far as checks and balances, and it seems like Synergy is on board with that in terms of checking things technologically, and then a manual, right, check with the eyes and making sure we do a couple of rounds of that. But we do think that we can make this happen. We're pretty confident about that before, let's say, August. Yeah, because
Okay.
if we don't have an actual product ready to go, say by August 10th, then we're not ready to roll for the school year. We're not going to do this on August 29th and then try it out September 3rd. That's just not how this is going to work. Yep. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Do you anticipate going over any of these proposed changes with students before the end of this school year in preparation for next year? And if so, does it make sense to share those materials or whatever it is you're giving to teachers and students with the 8th grade teachers
Yes and yes.
in order to have our rising freshmen in the loop before they get there? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the shift in terms of this particular approach, but also just the over communication, is probably going to be initially, yes, at the high school level, but blasting this out to the whole admin team to ensure that if they want to share out messaging so that they can avoid some questions from, not that we don't mind questions, but we don't want people to feel as though this one adjustment at the high school is somehow going to be district wide and that type of thing, because that's definitely not the case, and that there are systems of education that are in place at the elementary and middle level that very much work for those levels, and those need to remain. So yeah, definitely in many cases, I think the 8th grade class and our current 9th grade class are probably in some really nice places in terms of this won't be a huge impact of shift upon them as they're experiencing a new building and a new setting and a new level of learning. Our juniors, our current juniors and current sophomores may struggle with this a little bit. My apologies, Walker. But I know that you'll transition with the best of them. But I think the important piece is to get groups of students together like Walker and have some really in-depth conversations, really honest conversations around what it looks like, what their trepidations are and fears and concerns, and be able to work through that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering how would weighting work for accelerated and AP courses.
Yep. The beauty of that is that the translation is the same. So right now we have a 5 and 10% bump for accelerated and then AP classes. And so the weight goes with any translation, and it sticks with any of the classes that are currently accelerated in AP. So students who are currently in those classes receiving that small 5 or 10% bump on that course score will enjoy the same bump when we translate scores, but also they'll enjoy the same bump in a 0 to 100% scale as you take continued accelerated and AP courses. The number one rule of any adjustment of any system, the number one rule of any adjustment in a system of education is that you don't do any harm to students. And so we're working, Mrs. Ellison and I, on a conversion process that does not harm any students. In fact, every student will be helped, supported through the process. So, and we found a couple of moments where we actually had a process that may have actually harmed some students, and so we paused and regrouped and start again. So that's always the number one rule. If there's a decision that we make or an accountability measure that's put in place that somehow hurts a student, it's not acceptable.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, yes. Question, suggestion is, as this is going to start getting rolled out, both for prospective students who are looking at our school district and current, is maybe having a good web page. I'm sure it's out there already, but this is how we grade, this is our, that information of kind of those expectations and how you guys are doing things here. So that could be really helpful. I don't know why I didn't look for that, 4 years ago, but I didn't.
So that's a section, a really important section at the beginning of our program of studies that's been in there for at least 5 years, maybe 6 years at this point, with Mrs. Ellis's involvement. And so what we'll be doing is we'll simply be replacing that front section of this is how grades are not only calculated, but this is how teachers actually use the grading system and the grading tools. So that will be replaced with this particular system. The program of studies is linked in a number of different places, and it's also shared via email and newsletter actually every week. And so, and it's also put into the hands of all incoming transfer students, whatever the case may be. Parents at 8th grade Step Up Night are provided with it, and at the same time, all students on grade 9 orientation day, we send it home. So it's actually the most important part of the program of studies besides the list of courses. All other things really fall way below that. If you want to add to that.
We would also be updating our student handbook and our family handbooks like we do each year. And we have them both open at the same time to make sure they obviously align, because there's a lot of areas that we like to make sure are covered in both, just in case they happen to look at one versus the other.
Isn't in the parent view, there's a breakdown of the grading? I know I've seen it in there somewhere,
In parent view, you're
at
going to
least
see
for my high school
yeah,
student.
you're going to see the course assignments and the scores for those course assignments, and then you're going to see an overall course grade. So you'll see a list of assignments and then a number, and then you'll see the course grade roll up. Those that overall course grade is the one that's going to continue to change as different assignments are put in there. And so the same thing would be the grade book, if you will, isn't going to change its overall view of what either parents or students see. It's going to be the number. So instead of maybe a 3.5, it's something that is synonymous with a 0 to 100, but it'll still roll up in the same way. And those course grades for each particular semester are going to roll up into a semester GPA and then into an overall year GPA, which are put on the transcript. And that's also done in Synergy. It's really, really nice that we have a grade book that speaks to a transcript in Synergy. So there's no manual translation. There are spot checks, which Mrs. Ellis and her team do consistently and constantly to ensure that the metrics in Synergy are calculating correctly. But yeah, it's a pretty seamless process right now.
Well, I know how gradebook works, but isn't there a section I don't know if it's in the gradebook piece or somewhere in it that shows
It's at the assignment level
At
that
the
you're
assignment
thinking about.
level?
Yep.
it's got the 0 to
Yep.
100,
It
and
has
then
the
it's got the
scale.
breakdown of the 4.0, the 4
Mhm.
point,
Yep.
3.5, and all that. That's in there
Yes.
as well.
That's at the assignment level, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay.
Just to jog my memory from the last time we spoke, are these each letter grade going to be 10, are these 10-point increments, or are we doing it, is there a different scale?
So the scale in terms of the overall scale is 0 to 100 based on a percentage. But as far as what would be, the question I think you're getting is what's passing, which
What's
versus not
A,
passing.
what's
Yep,
B, what's
yep.
C?
So they are broken out, but not by 10-point increments. There are a few, there's one 6-point increment and then 3 7-point increments.
Okay.
Yeah. I think my math is close-ish on that.
You're correct.
Yeah.
And I think you had talked about a cut score of 70.
Yes.
Cut score of
For
70 being passing. There are some that I think that I think the most inconsistent data point among York and Cumberland County high schools, and perhaps the only inconsistent data point, is what is passing. There are some that will list 65 as passing. There are a few that will list 60. There are a few schools in the central Maine and northern part that are 60 and 65, which is fine. There's a certain level of rigor and difficulty that go along with that type of grading system. But our leadership team is pretty confident, which is made up of some veteran educators who have lived in both worlds for 25, 30 years. They've been at that building and they know the value of that 70 as a cut score.
The other piece that I'll just share, I don't know if this is true for the high school one as well, but back to your question, Anastasia, about seeing the breakdown and the legend that goes along with it. I know at the middle school, if you look at the report card view, that also shows the scale. So if you're remembering that, check the report card view. Yeah. If there aren't any other questions, I appreciate the work, the time investment that this is going to take, the support of the board. Your thoughtful questions, I think, will guide us and as well as sourcing some of that feedback from students. So we look forward to their perspective, and parents as well, their perspective in the transition. And we're hopeful, even if we have to take a really aggressive communication campaign and, do a lot of work to help students adjust to this, that ultimately it is going to better prepare them for life beyond. And so that's always the goal, but we appreciate your support.
So next item is the Spring Community Forum.
So I have a brief update to kind of share before I forget to share it. I know one of the pieces that we had talked about is raising awareness of the event, which will happen on Tuesday, May 13th at 6 p.m. So if it's not already in your calendar, it seemed like it was a long ways away when we first started talking about it, but it's creeping right up. In fact, it will be next month's meeting that we will start with that community forum and then transition to a later start for the curriculum committee at 7 p.m. I do have an update to provide. All of the materials for publicizing this, the print materials, have been prepared. I have samples here to show you. We have some of these flyers, which you've proofed and previewed the last time that we met. And then we also have a mailer. I can't remember, I should have looked at the pile, but it's the mailer, the postcard mailer will go to all of the businesses that joined us for the career fair earlier in the fall. Those are some of our partners that were in existence before. And Katie has done a really nice job of preparing all of that material so they're ready to be stamped and roll out. The ask tomorrow night at the board meeting will be that each member of the board takes a packet of these. I think we bundled them in 10, and we would ask that you bring those back to your community and place them in high traffic areas or visible areas for folks to help us generate the support in a tangible way. We also will be publicizing through the newsletters and through our social media channels in a scheduled and timely way. So you can expect to see this everywhere. Our goal obviously is to be thoughtful in the ways that we push it out. We don't want it to become background noise for people, but at the same time, we're hoping that we give them enough of an advance notice, a month in advance, to prepare to be here. And as we mentioned previously, there is a plan to televise and record that as well. So folks who are not in attendance can do that, and then also have a venue for providing us with their feedback. My hope for tonight's conversation was just to gel a little bit more, and this is our last meeting as we discuss it. I know it'll come up in other committees as well, as other committees are on board and interested in the feedback and want to help support us. I know PR Tech, for example, will take it up in the next agenda. but I wanted to kind of get a sense and revisit the conversation around format. As you might remember at the prior meeting, I had shared and outlined with some questions. And I think the conversation largely focused on a goal of presenting some of the highlights. I think the committee felt as though folks might be interested, but they might not necessarily have an awareness. And so we talked about highlights of progress that we had made toward our strategic plan goals, kind of picking a few of those out as highlights and sharing them. We have some materials that are generated in support of that. So I think if we spent a small amount of time giving high-level overview and then focusing some of our questioning on the questions that you all approved in that last meeting, that might be a good way to do it. I think we should plan for flexibility in terms of number of attendance. I think, we've had low attendance previously. We're hopeful that we'll increase that attendance. What does the group of stakeholders look like? If all of our postcards serve us really well, but perhaps we don't get maybe student or parent participation in the way that we might hope, that might shift the dynamic and the nature of that conversation as we work together. So I think as we talk tonight a little bit more about format, it's going to be really important that we keep an open mind and some flexibility for how we might approach this in the moment. But I am curious about, any additional thought that you may have given it since we last discussed, or suggestions you may have as we finalize the preparation.
So my statement is basically along the same lines as what you were just saying about the possibility of not getting maybe student and parent participation, but maybe having, hopefully having administrator and teacher participation. That would at least allow a conversation about, the community members. I feel like could get a real taste of what our district is teaching and how they're doing it and the ways that they're really engaging the students, and rolling out this strategic plan to help the community. So I think that we could, as nice as it would be, obviously, to have parent and student participation, I think if we could skirt that a little, if we had administrator / teacher participation as well.
I think there are definitely lots of opportunities to continue the conversation regardless of who shows up. I agree. I think that we need to put our best effort out there in communicating and publicizing and hope that we luck out. But if not, I think even at a district level with our administrative team and some teachers involved in that conversation, there's still plenty to talk about and there's plenty of awareness to raise. It's not often that we have opportunities district-wide to have elementary teachers present with high school teachers and, middle school teachers getting a sense of what pre-K looks like. So I think there's still a great opportunity to maximize the time that we have. Agreed. Other thoughts on format? Are we still behind some of the maybe visual presentations? We talked before about some of the video content that we had produced as being a portion of that. I think it's nice because it's hearing from a student and teacher perspective in a way that feels comfortable. I know sometimes it's tough to be put on the spot. And then perhaps we'll ask our administrators, for example, or maybe some of you folks on the board who feel comfortable facilitating those conversations too, to elicit some of the feedback. We talked about a survey option. I think that's still a good way to source the feedback from the questions, and it will also help us open it up beyond. I wonder about discussion. If we did a presentation and then maybe broke up into some smaller groups and maybe verbally went through some of those questions as well, folks who might be willing to facilitate that conversation could then help put that information together with the survey. Make that decision, yeah. Mm-hmm.
If it is a larger group, wishful thinking maybe, but if it's a larger group, then I also think small groups lend themselves better to people being able to talk comfortably and, have some of that dialogue where they might not speak out in a real large group. So I think to your point, we're not going to really know until that night. Uh-huh.
Another area that I don't know that we've unpacked thoroughly is thinking about what our agenda may look like for that evening. Is this something that folks think would be helpful to debrief in the moment? Should we leave space for that? And if so, what might the debrief look like? Or do we postpone that to a later meeting when we've had an opportunity to look and source all of the feedback? Does anybody have a sense of that?
Do you mean debrief just as the committee or board or okay.
So we'll have that hour,
It's gonna be after.
right?
Oh, okay, great.
So it'll be an interesting.
That'd be pretty fresh.
It would,
like,
yes, it would
Yeah.
be, it would be pretty fresh.
Yeah.
I think, Anastasia and I typically consult about agenda prior to the meeting. So for me, it's a, first case logistical piece. Do we place an item on the agenda or is it too fresh for us? And if we do place it on the agenda, what would you want this conversation to look like? Because this will be our next meeting. So thinking now about what our questions might be will probably be helpful.
Just might want to have it twice.
Mm-hmm.
So, oh, that wasn't my question.
I mean, I know when I leave a meeting here, I tend to go back and look at my notes, especially since we have a board meeting tomorrow night. I have to look at my notes to see what I'm going to present and what I'm not going to present. I know those questions that are going to come from certain board members as to data. I just like to, especially for me to process,
Mm-hmm.
take in all the questions and things that we're thinking right at our next meeting. Like, what can we do better if attendance is poor? What can we do better to maximize this? If there's students and teachers there and parents and they have questions, what can we do to help facilitate getting them the answers if we don't have those answers right then and there to get them out to them? Look at the surveys, look at the response. That's how my brain functions.
My quick question was, I've actually had conversations with different people who are thinking about moving to our district. So would this be an appropriate place to invite prospective families? Okay, all right. So I will hand the cards out to them. Thank you.
I think so.
The only other issue that I see with pushing it out, which would be really nice, is that June meeting is always iffy. So, if we don't get that June meeting, then we're pushing it
Mm-hmm.
months down the road. And this committee may not be the same. So as much as I think it would benefit us to wait a little while, I just don't know how feasible that would be.
I think, what I would propose after hearing what folks are saying is it's going to be fresh of mind and probably the processing part of it will be the conversation that comes of it. I think we could have access to whatever survey data is available to us. That would be easy enough to share for us to look at that. We could talk about attendance. Was it great? Was there something else that we, some aspects that we thought worked really well and some that maybe didn't, and what, take notes about what that would look like in the future if we were to attempt that again. I think we could talk about questions. If there are opportunities for small discussion, we could talk about some of the interesting angles that those conversations took. I think we can predict the small groups are likely to go in different directions as they do. Perhaps it's an opportunity for folks to share some takeaways or some aha moments. I think the questions are really going to elicit that, and I think it'll depend on the perspectives of those who attend. And then the question of how we can get answers for unanswered questions, we can make a plan for the appropriate bodies to reach out and share that information. It doesn't mean that the committee necessarily has to problem solve those things, but we can develop a plan to work toward that end in the off season. I agree with you. I think if we wait, it's a lost opportunity for sure. So we'll plan to include it on the agenda. We'll be looking for that information, understanding that I think some of the survey data could continue to trickle in, but that's just a piece of it. And then we can always place it on a fall revisit. We can come back in the fall and say, did we have any additional feedback that came through? And, maybe there are some conversations that are spurred by that over the summer when we're on the baseball fields and chit-chatting about the progress. So I think, revisiting it is certainly an option, even if there's some time that's gone by, but we would be remiss if we didn't consider it initially. Any other thoughts, questions?
I think it might help us too if we have some discussion questions just ready. If we have a small group, say, and they're very quiet, just so to help the facilitator with some prompts, might not be even necessary. Some groups will just jump right in with questions and lots of conversation. But if we could also have some backup, and maybe we'll know ahead of time, right, who our facilitators would be, or we're going to have to kind of wing it a little bit.
Yeah, we will definitely do some planning for that. And I think adjust in the moment to how that ultimately looks. How do we divide up groups and whatnot? And I think just some flexibility, but the facilitators should be prepped with that. We did pitch some questions in our last meeting that I think just landed, and that's what we stuck with. I can review those briefly to give folks a refresher on that. I know it was in some of the linked minutes. But the first question, there are 4 bullets, so I'll go through each one. The first bullet is, are you aware of our district's vision? Are you seeing an impact of this work in the experience of our students and/or in the community? The second bullet, have you seen communication about the progress toward our strategic plan? What would you like to see more of? What methods of communication work best for you? The third bullet, what aspects of the plan are you most curious about or interested in? And the fourth, if you could prioritize one area of the strategic plan for increased attention in year 2, what would it be and why? And so I think if we have the perspective of, roughly 20-ish or so minutes, 20 to 30 by the time we get settled, of content that we would prepare to present, and another half hour or so for conversation, it wouldn't surprise me if it runs late, into the curriculum committee time, just because I think sometimes it takes a little bit of time to break the ice. And then when you get people talking, all of a sudden you kind of elicit more when there's conversation based. So I feel like those questions are going to be able to carry us through our allotted time and give us some good survey data.
I couldn't type fast. Do you have those questions typed out, and could you
sure do.
copy and paste them for me?
I'd love to.
Thank you.
I'll bring it over to you so you got it.
Oh, I can copy paste. I have it here.
Oh, you
Yeah.
can get it right
Oh
there?
yeah, it's
Okay.
done.
Nice technology.
That
It's
quick.
Quick.
Any other thoughts, questions, concerns? No? Okay. Our next meeting is May 13th. We will start with a community forum at 6 PM. Curriculum is at 7. And we are adjourned at 6:55.